Okay, bienvenue, bonjour tout le monde. Thank you everyone for coming to the 39th event of Disrupting Disruptions, the Feminist and Accessible Publishing, Communications, and Technologies Practices Speaker and Workshop Series. I'm Dr. Alex Ketchum, and I'm a professor of feminist and social justice studies at McGill and the organizer of this series. The Feminist and Accessible Publishing, Communications, and Technologies Practices Speaker and Workshop Series seeks to bring together scholars, creators, and people in industry working at the intersections of digital humanities, computer science, feminist studies, disability studies, communication studies, LGBTQ studies, history, and critical race theory. We are hosting 12 free virtual and professionally captioned events this winter. You can find our full schedule as well as our video recordings of past events at disruptingdisruptions.com. That's the redirect URL. The other one's way too long. Even I can't remember it. So disruptingdisruptions.com. You can also find our list of sponsors, including Shirk, Milieu, and the Indigenous Futures Lab. Next Wednesday is our last event of the semester. On March 31st, Kate Crawford will be speaking about her new book, Atlas of AI. For this event, recording is enabled, so the event can be embedded on our website. But don't worry, only the speakers will be shown in the video. We also have a Q&A box option available below on your screen. So throughout the talk, you may type your questions in the Q&A box, and there will be some time at the end for Rose to answer them. We can't guarantee that every question will be answered, but we are grateful to the discussion that you generate. Thank you to our captionist for today, Sarah. Past series speakers Suzanne Kite and Jess McLean have pointed to the physical and material impacts of the digital world. While the events this semester are virtual, everything that we do is tied to the land and the space that we are on. We must always be mindful of the lands that the servers enabling our virtual events are on and the materials that are mined from the ground that run our technology. Furthermore, as the series seeks to draw attention to power relations that have been invisibilized, it is important to acknowledge Canada's long colonial history and current political practices. The series is affiliated with the Institute for Gender, Sexuality, and Feminist Studies of McGill University. We are currently located in Tiohtià:ke, Montreal, on unceded Kanien'kehá:ka territory. Furthermore, the ongoing organizing efforts by the Indigenous communities such as the Wet'suwet'en people at the Unistoten camp make clear the ever-present and ongoing colonial violence in Canada. Interwoven with this history of colonization is one of enslavement and racism. This university's namesake, James McGill, enslaved Black and Indigenous peoples. It was in part from the money he acquired through these violent acts that McGill University was founded. These histories are here with us in this space and inform the conversations we have today. I encourage you to learn about the lands that you are on. nativeland.ca is a fantastic resource for doing so. As we reflect on the ways that white supremacist violence impacts our world, we must acknowledge the ongoing violence against Asian American and Asian Canadian communities, including last week's violent and racist attacks against Asian American women in Georgia. While white supremacist violence against Asian communities has increased during the pandemic, this is part of a longer history of violence against Asian communities in the US and Canada that includes, but is not limited to, the Chinese Exclusion Act, US occupation of the Philippines, and Japanese internment camps. The Asian American Feminist Collective has created invaluable resources that speak to this, and I encourage you to check out their resources. Now for today's event. Rose Eveleth is a writer and producer who explores how humans tangle with science and technology. She is the creator of Flash Forward Presents and host of Flash Forward and Advice Born from the Future, which are such fantastic podcasts. I listen to every episode and strongly encourage you to do so. They're great. In Rose's work, she's covered everything from fake tumbleweed farms to million-dollar baccarat heists. She's helped launch ESPN's 30 for 30 podcast, and her work has appeared in The Atlantic, Smithsonian Magazine, Nautilus Magazine, CBS, Racked, Scientific American, Eater, The New York Times, Fusion, Vice, 538, and more. She co-edited the 2018 edition of What Future? The year's best writing on what's next for people, technology, and the planet. Her work has appeared in the Best American Science and Asia Writing, and she's a forthcoming comics essay hybrid that tackles big ideas about the future coming out. And I'm sure Rose will talk about that a bit more today. So please join me in welcoming Rose. Thank you everyone for joining us today. I'm so excited.
Thank you so much for having me. I am Rose, like Alex said. I come to you currently on occupied Ohlone land. I will do a quick visual description of myself as well for those who are just listening along. I'm also going to try and describe the slides that I have to sort of make sure that folks can kind of follow along if they're not looking or if they're just listening. The slides aren't super important, so don't worry too much. So I am a white woman with large glasses. I just got these glasses, so I'm kind of excited about them. Large octagonal glasses and a sort of denim shirt that has flowers on it, and there are some plants behind me right now. Thank you again to Alex and Mira and Kim and Sarah, who is captioning today. It's so lovely to say yes to events where I know that these sorts of questions and considerations will be taken into account. So I'm really excited to be here. So today I want to talk to you about the future. I want to talk to you a little bit about why it's important for more people to claim futures, to be critical of futures, to sort of be actively involved in conversations about what tomorrow could be. And then talk a little bit about sort of the ways in which I approach thinking about the future and thinking about these questions of futurism and who gets to be a futurist and who gets to claim that space of the future. So to begin, I would like for you all to picture, oh, hello. That's my hello slide that I forgot to advance. Picture a futurist. For a lot of people, this prompt is going to bring up images of a certain kind of person, perhaps people who look like this. And, mostly white cis men, potentially wearing glasses, probably wearing like a dress shirt with jeans to be like both edgy and slightly formal, possibly standing on a TED Talk stage. I think that all of these images are from TED Talks, actually. So on the right, we have a photograph of Elon Musk. On the bottom left, we have a photograph of Peter Thiel. And on the top left, we have a photograph of Ray Kurzweil, who are all sort of white men in their 40s through 60s-ish. And, perhaps you folks who are watching think about the future more than this, and maybe these aren't the people that you imagine. But I think for a lot of the public, this is kind of what a futurist looks like. And in many ways, we can't be blamed for picturing these folks when someone says futurist, because these are the people who constantly get up on TED Talk stages, right? And do these sorts of talks about what the future is going to be like. These are the people who are given the title futurist or who claim the title futurist for themselves. And these are the folks who we're sort of told are building the future for us, right? As if the future is being sort of constructed by this very tiny cohort of largely very, very rich white men, while the rest of us kind of, wait with bated breath to like hear what they have made for us. But I sort of reject that idea. And I want to talk about why. And part of it is something that's sort of a secret, I think, about the future. It's the scariest part about the future. It's also the most amazing part of the future. And the secret is this. The future has not happened yet, which sounds incredibly obvious, right? Of course, the future hasn't happened yet by its very nature. It is the future. But it doesn't always feel true sometimes. I think a little bit about when I learned, and maybe this is revealing a little bit about me, when I learned about gravity and the ways in which a very heavy object and a lighter object fall at the same rate. And like, that that's true, but you don't really believe that that's true, right? Because it just doesn't seem right. In some ways, it sort of feels like the same way about the future, because we're constantly being told by advertisements, by tech CEOs, by futurists that, this or that is definitely going to happen, that this is the path that we are on, that, here we are. I interviewed a tech entrepreneur a while back who said something to me when I was asking him about critiques of his product, this was a couple of years ago. And today's ed tech would like laugh in his face of how much more creepy it's gotten. But this was years ago when he was talking about surveilling students to make sure they weren't cheating in ways that were pretty creepy. And I was asking him about those pushbacks. And he said to me, well, you can't go against the natural evolution of technology, which is not a thing. Not a thing, but there is this sense that we're on this roller coaster, we're on this ride, and we should all just like buckle up and get ready because this is what's going to happen. And so that's kind of a feeling that I hear a lot from people when I talk to them about the future. And the other big feeling that I hear from people is fear of the future. And being afraid of the future is quite frankly like a totally normal reaction to our current world, right? To the global pandemics, rising temperatures, spreading authoritarianism, all of the bad things that are happening and that feel like they just keep happening. And I think probably many of you understand this feeling, right? You maybe understand what it's like to feel afraid of the future. And it's totally normal and it's very common. And in fact, there is some really interesting data that shows just how normal and common this is. So many of you may be familiar with something called a Skinner box, which is basically an experiment designed in the 1950s by a psychologist named B.F. Skinner. Essentially, a rat learns that a red light flashes, and if the red light flashes, it's going to get a shock. And this is sort of a pioneering experiment to show how operant conditioning works, right? Animals learn to associate signals with rewards or punishments. And then even if that food or the zap is not present, they react to the signal as if it was. So what's on the slide right now is a black and white photograph of a rat sort of putting its nose up against a little lever. So in 2006, a researcher named Gregory Burns replicated this sort of famous experiment in a different way with people. And in the human version, he attached electrodes to the tops of people's feet. And he told them that they would have to wait for a shock for up to 30 seconds. And what he said later was that for many people in this experiment, the waiting was way worse than the shock itself. In fact, about a third of the people in this experiment opted to get a bigger shock right away than have to wait the 30 seconds to get the smaller shock later, right? And Burns writes about how, this speaks to some of the ways in which the future, even when we kind of know what's coming, can feel very scary, and that waiting period can feel very scary. This combination, right? This combination of that feeling of inevitability and that fear that a lot of us have of the future is really great for the powerful people who claim to be inventing the future, right? A sense of inevitability is actually sort of the dream of marketers, of monarchs, of tech moguls. If you convince people that there is no other way, there's no other possibility, this is it, this is what's going to happen, you can sell them almost anything, right? If you convince people that the work is done, that sort of we are just on this path, or even that, the arc of the moral universe bends towards justice, right? If you convince people that we're already on that train, the train has left the station, you can get people to settle into a complacency and sort of stop pushing for the things that they actually want. But again, the future has not happened yet. It can be better. It can be worse than anything people are pitching you. Nobody knows what's going to happen tomorrow or in 5 years or in 10 years, definitely not in 20 years. And anybody who tells you they do is totally lying. And that is actually a really good thing, because the minute that we all take the future for granted as either impenetrable or out of our grasp, that's sort of when we give up some of our greatest power in the world. You watching this, I cannot see you, but I'm going to guess that you are not Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, or the president of the United States. And obviously those people have more literal power than the folks here, but we all do have agency. And there is a couple of really amazing pieces of this. And there are some really powerful ways in which thinking about the future can actually kind of change that future and can build the future. The first way that I want to talk about is sort of very personal, and it's something called mental time travel. So there is research on this. It's a very cool term. Psychologists have coined this term mental time travel, which I love as just a word. It's like a cool phrase, but it's actually quite simple, unlike real time travel, which is quite challenging. But we can all do mental time travel right now together. So if we all stop and think for a second and imagine, let's say tomorrow morning, you wake up. And right now, if you were to sit and take a second to imagine that, you probably kind of know what that's going to look like, right? You know what your room looks like. You probably know what you'll do when you first get out of bed. You might know what you're going to make for breakfast. You might already be thinking about like what email you need to send or your first meeting of the day. You might be imagining how your kids will behave tomorrow morning, or your dog, or whatever it is. And that picturing is mental time travel. You can also do this with things that are not tomorrow, right? You can picture for example, maybe your next family get together. Although in times of coronavirus, this is a little bit both easier and more challenging, right? Because you could definitely picture tomorrow, because it's probably not that different from today. But picturing the next family get together is actually slightly more challenging. But the sort of point is that you can imagine these things, and predicting in your mind and picturing in your mind what that will be like is mental time travel. And there is research that shows that being able to do this is actually correlated with happiness. People who have depression are actually have a really hard time doing this kind of mental projection. If you've ever had depression, you perhaps understand this feeling where it just sort of feels like, well, every day is just going to be exactly the same and nothing is going to change and I can't really picture anything being different. But there is research that suggests that if you practice this mental time travel, you can actually feel calmer, a little happier, more prepared for the future. And that's good, right? We all would like to be all of those things: calmer, happier, more prepared for the future. And so practicing this prediction, this sort of way of thinking about, okay, well, if this happens, then what would I do and what might that look like, actually has a way of helping us feel more prepared to respond to crises, right? Like the ones we are in currently. And that's good, just sort of selfishly, right? Selfishly, that's good because it makes you personally better prepared. But there are non-selfish reasons to think about the future too. And one of them is that you are actually being pitched futures pretty much all the time. So this is a sampling of my Instagram ads, which is sort of revealing to you perhaps what Instagram thinks that I want. On the right, we have a lovely woman with a very beautiful plant, quite similar to the one that I have on the right here in this image. On the left, we have gender neutral clothing, and on the bottom left, we have whiskey. And these are all pitching you a future in which you are able to keep plants alive, a future in which you are as attractive as that a very attractive person in the gender neutral separates ad, a future in which you are in this beautiful, I don't know, probably Scotland somewhere, drinking whiskey. Advertising is a form of pitching you a future, right? Pitching you a way in which you could be, or you could live, or you could look if you were to buy into that product. Every politician's platform is describing a future, right? One in which they make changes that give you access to something that you didn't have before. Lobbyist groups from Planned Parenthood to the NRA are pitching futures, right? They're telling stories about how if you are on our side, and if you come do work with us, here's what your life will be like, and this is what will happen. So on the slides right now, you have on the right-hand side a poster of Bernie Sanders saying enough is enough. On the left top, we have a Planned Parenthood poster that says your boyfriend will thank you, with two very lovely men hugging. And on the bottom left, we have an NRA poster that says defend your right to self-defense. These are all pitching futures in which you may or may not want to live. I have my own opinions about which ones of these I want to live in. And sort of this world building is sort of constantly being pumped at us, right? Often based on algorithms that want to show us things that they think that we will like. These futures are inherently political, not just the literally political ones that I've shown you, but all of them, right? They all claim to present an idea of what a better future is going to be like. And if we don't engage with sort of thinking about whether or not the futures that we are being pitched all the time are in fact better, then we don't really know how to move forward or laterally or prevent or endorse any of them. And we hand over kind of a really key weapon in this really important fight to make a better future. And that analogy, sort of the using battle analogies, is sort of intentional here, right? Because in a lot of cases, this is quite literally a fight. This is a battle that we do need to collectively gear up for. And partially that's because it is always being waged. It has been waged for a very long time now, and it's happening all around us. Adrienne Maree Brown, who is an incredible writer and speaker, has a speech from, I believe it's 2015. And in it, she says this. She says, as long as the future comes from imagination, there will be divergent paths that are moving in and out of alignment, in and out of conflict. And her point there is multiple, but one of the things that you see people talk about is utopia, dystopia. What does that look like? What does that mean? At the beginning of this, I had a slide up that said, imagine better futures. And that's sort of the name of this talk, but better for who, right? Utopia for the futurists that I showed you before on that slide is likely not utopia for me. And it's definitely not utopia for further marginalized groups, right? So thinking about whose imagination gets to win. And that's not just about flying cars, right? That's not just about smart cities. It's also about sort of the lived experience of lots and lots of people. So in her talk, Adrienne Maree Brown is talking about the context of policing. She talks about how it's imagination that makes police officers see Black men and boys as physically bigger than they are, more dangerous than they are, which directly leads to the deaths of people like Tamir Rice and Oscar Grant. And unfortunately, that list of names has gotten a lot longer since that 2015 post that she made on her blog. And today, like Alex mentioned, we see this collective imagination around coronavirus and the anti-Asian violence that has been perpetuated against that community across the United States, including where I am in the Bay Area. And so Adrienne Maree Brown says that we are in an imagination battle. This is a fight. And, imagination is a key piece of it. And that includes things like world building, includes things like futurism. And this has real bodily impacts. I think, futurism has a tendency to live in the abstract, to live in sort of theoretical, whimsical ideas. But futurism is also thinking about how do we keep people alive? Literally. That is futurism too. And it's sort of ignored in a lot of futurist circles. And, I've come to thinking about futurism in this way over the last 5 or 6 years of making my podcast Flash Forward. When I first started working on the show, I definitely was more in kind of the zany, like, wow, let's think about the future. It will be so fun. And what if we had artificial wombs and this and that? And it was really fun. And I learned a ton. And I wasn't always thinking about futurism as a political act, to be frank. I was thinking of it more as kind of a fun, sciencey way to explain things to people. But as I worked on it, I sort of realized more and more that, in fact, what I was doing was trying to expand the definition of futurism, and that was actually a lot more political and powerful and potentially dangerous than I first realized. And so I want to tell you a little story about something that happened that made me kind of realize that my little independent podcast was potentially part of something bigger than that. So a little bit of background on Flash Forward in case you're not familiar. The show has been around for almost 6 years, 7 seasons. We're starting the 7th season next week. I should know that better off the top of my head. Excuse me, Flash Forward is all about the future. And every episode starts with a little sort of field trip into the future, an audio drama. So it's fictional. We start with a fictional field trip into the future. We talk about some idea. We show you what it's going to sound like, what it might be like, little scenes of what might happen. And then we come back to today and we talk to, experts, real experts about how that world might happen, might not happen, depending on what it is. At this point, I've done over 100 episodes of the show. And chugging along was doing it. The intro features range from everything from fake museum tours, conversations between friends, commercials, public service announcements, speeches, all kinds of just sort of found footage from the future. And I did an episode at one point and thought it was like a regular episode from like all the others. And this was in the first season. And then I got a text from a friend saying that Rush Limbaugh had talked about my show on his radio program. And I had 2 questions. First being, why was this person listening to Rush Limbaugh? Second being, what the hell did Rush Limbaugh say about my small independent podcast about the future? And it turns out that he had somehow come across one of these episodes. And here's what he said about the episode. He said, I came across on one of my little tech blogs last night something I thought, this has to be from The Onion. This has to be Scott Ott. This has to be satire. But no, it was real. The headline, quote, to stop climate change, we must genetically engineer human beings. So this is an episode that I did. This was back when the show was called Meanwhile in the Future and was at Gizmodo. And it was about a philosophy paper that had been written by some philosophers about this idea about, and their point was kind of to be intentionally provocative, to say clearly we're not going to do anything about climate change, so we might as well just start genetically engineering humans to be less climate intensive. And their proposals were things like giving people better night vision, so we get to use less lights at night, making people smaller, intentionally giving people a meat allergy so that they stop eating meat. They're the proposals. And the paper itself doesn't literally advocate for this. It kind of uses it as a provocation to say, you know, are we willing to do this if we're not willing to do everything else? And the episode itself that I made starts with this idea and then basically interviews a bunch of geneticists and ethicists who say, A, this is extremely unethical, and B, it's not even really doable, right? And trying to make people have night vision is not something we know how to do, right? Which would be very cool. I would sign up for that. And so the episode was essentially kind of a takedown of this idea, or sort of a rebuttal to say, like, here's why this doesn't make a lot of sense. But that's not really what Rush Limbaugh got out of it, obviously. I'm assuming he did not listen. I actually think that's probably fair to say. But here's what he said about the idea, about the episode. He said, remember, we're dealing with questionably sane people here. That's why I take this stuff seriously. I listen to these people just like I listen to the Iranians when they tell us what they're going to do. I listen to our enemies when they tell us they're going to wipe us out. I listen to these people when they tell us what they believe. And at first I thought that maybe this was like funny, right? Because it's like, oh, ha ha ha, Rush Limbaugh did not understand anything about what I was doing. And he talked about it on his show. And you know, like, that's kind of goofy and wacky and funny. And then I realized that, in fact, this was not very funny. In fact, people get really worked up about things that are not true, like thinking that scientists can genetically and are genetically engineering babies to change climate change, which is, to be clear, not happening. And, you know, I don't want to get too bent out of shape about preventing this. Rush Limbaugh did not listen to the episode, very obviously. He just sort of read a headline that someone had written about it. There's not that much I could have done to potentially prevent him from doing that, because if, again, he had actually listened to the thing that I made, he would know that that was not the proposal. So it's not that I think, you know, oh, I got to change everything, I got to change what I'm doing, but it did sort of make me realize that that this is sort of like playing with fire, right? That it's really powerful and that people get really captured by these ideas, and that there is a power in thinking about the future and thinking about what we're doing here. And it's not that I don't think that people should play with fire in this way. I actually do. And sort of, I'm here advocating that we all should do it, but we should also kind of understand what it means and understand how powerful it is. You know, what I'd like for people to do is to play with that fire as well, but know how powerful it is, that how powerful it is. Yes. And you know, seize the means of future production. You know, it's not just those same people who get to make the future. We all get to do that. And that's kind of the premise of a lot of my work, is sort of saying that, you know, when you hear about things on Flash Forward, you don't generally hear them from the classic tech guys, right? You hear about these ideas from other people. So thinking about how we can all seize the means of future production, I want to walk you through a little bit of how I imagine doing that, and also sort of how you can do that as well. And the first thing to do is to sort of reimagine a futurist, right? What we earlier in this, I asked you to imagine a futurist. Imagining more types of futurists, bringing more people to this word and to this idea. And this is not, I want to be clear, saying like, let's invite people to sit at our futurist table. People have been doing futurism work for a long time that don't get called futurists, right? Social movements, social justice activists, indigenous folks, like, there have been future thinking, there is future thinking that has much longer traditions than the word futurist. So it's less about saying, let's invite those people into the world of futurism, and more about, let's listen to them when they're talking. And so I just want to talk about shout out a couple people who I find really incredible and whose work I sort of look to, some of whom you may already be familiar with. So this is a slide with 3 photographs. On the right, we have Aisha Nyandoro, who does a basic income project in Jackson, Mississippi. Often when you hear about basic income or universal basic income, you sort of hear it from techie guys in Silicon Valley. Aisha is doing this for single moms in Jackson, Mississippi, and has had some really incredible success. On the top left is a photograph of Walida Imarisha, who is a prison abolition activist and writer and science fiction author and just incredible activist in the Pacific Northwest. And on the bottom left, we have Alice Wong, who runs Disability Visibility, which is an incredible resource, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with it, for disability in the future. And Alice has been talking a lot, particularly during the pandemic, about the ways in which thinking about science and technology and the future often leaves disabled folks out or imagines that they simply do not exist, which is eugenics, and we should not do that. And there's a lot to be said that I won't get into here necessarily about, futurism and disability and thinking about that. A couple more folks who I look to. On the right, we have Keolu Fox, who is one of the founders, I believe, of the Indigenous Futures Lab, which I know is involved a little bit in this series. Top left, we have Charlie Jane Anders, who is an incredible science fiction author who has a TED Talk about imagining futures that I truly should have just played for you instead of me rambling on for many minutes, because her talk is amazing. Bottom left, we have Ruha Benjamin, who I'm sure many of you are familiar with, an amazing author of Race After Technology and a bunch of other stuff. And then center bottom there is Tuck Woodstock, who makes an incredible podcast called Gender Reveal, and which at the very end of every interview, they ask the guest, what is your ideal future of gender? Which is sort of incredible and mind-blowing every time. And so just broadening out who you consider a futurist is sort of a good first step. Widen that circle, talk to more people, listen to more people who've been doing this work for a really long time, and thinking about who is impacted by the futures that we are imagining, right? When we talk again about imagine better futures, asking for who, and how are we making sure that that for who is more inclusive and more diverse and more accessible to everyone. The other thing about seizing the means of future production, which is a phrase I only added into this talk like a couple days ago, and I hope it makes any sense and lands, but is, again, I know I keep coming back to this slide, but just again, remembering that the future hasn't happened yet. Again, I know it's so obvious, but there are so many people within sort of powerful tech companies who weaponize the idea that the future is already upon us, that the future is like a thing that you don't have any control over. And it can feel that way. But we have some really amazing examples of situations in which that is not true. There is kind of a, I won't get on my soapbox too much, but there's a little bit of like hipster nihilism that sometimes happens, particularly on like Twitter circles of like, oh, haha, like, I guess we're in this dystopia, like nothing we can do about it, might as well just make jokes. And I love those jokes and I laugh at them as well, but there actually is something that we can do about it. Probably the best example, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with this, is Toronto, right? Activists in Toronto stopped Alphabet, which is Google's parent company, from doing what it wanted to do, which I feel like that's an incredible thing, right? If you'd want to talk about powerful companies, powerful tech companies, I mean, Google Alphabet is way up there, right? They were able to say like, no, this is not the future that we want. This is not the city that we want to live in. This is not the place we want to go. And they were successful in ways that I think is an incredible model for future people. Like, if you have a project like this that you want to push back on, there's Jathan Sadowski has a really great piece about sort of all of the ways in which activists were able to push back in this situation and say no, and actually, win in many ways. I harp on this a lot, but Google Glass is often told as this sort of like wacky tech failure story. And I would say, no, actually, Google Glass is an incredible success story for all of us, in which we said, no, we do not want people to be able to walk around and record us without us knowing all the time. And we set a boundary there in a way that I think is great. And I think, reframing that story as an incredible success is a way to kind of think about the future and think about how do we ask for technology that actually serves us. One thing that I hear a lot when I talk about this stuff is people saying like, why do you hate technology so much? Like, oh, are you a Luddite? Like, why do you hate technology? Why do you want to just stop everything? And, if I hated technology, I wouldn't spend pretty much all of my waking hours like thinking about it, right? And trying to make it better and advocating for better technology. the point here is to ask for better technology, is to hold these tech companies to a higher standard in a lot of ways, and to say, no, that this is not what we want. We want this. That's actually going to make our lives better. So Google Glass is, one of my favorite examples because I think people like to laugh it off. And I think these examples of places in which people have pushed back and have been able to say no are really inspiring, right? People like Sergey Brin, who is in this photograph of a person wearing Google Glass, would love for you to simply say like, oh, well, yep, Peter Thiel's just going to inject young people's blood into his veins and live forever, which is a real thing that he does want to do. But we can say like, no, actually, we would prefer not that. I mentioned earlier the idea of inevitable progress, the evolution, the natural evolution of technology. And again, that is not a thing. Sometimes the best thing to do, sometimes the most hopeful, best way forward is to actually say no and to actually destroy things and take things down. So what we have on the slide here on the right is a drawing of a man wearing a hat and a dress, sort of pointing off into the distance with people sort of with pitchforks essentially around him. And at the bottom it says the leader of the Luddites. And you've probably heard of Luddites, right? They hated technology. They just hated all technology willy-nilly, right? That is not, in fact, what the Luddites cared about. They did not hate technology out of some bizarre and irrational fear of progress, right? They were specifically targeting and disrupting factory owners who were running exploitive and dangerous operations. And they had a very clear mission, which was to not just kill all technology, but to say, no, this particular application of technology is actually bad for people. Just as an aside, fun fact that my producer Julia found as we were working on something related to Luddites is that Luddites were also very into smashing the gender binary. They had this imaginary leader, Ned Ludd. He was often depicted wearing a dress. People who were in the movement mostly identified as men, but they would often wear women's clothes at protests and describe themselves as the wives of General Ludd, just to piss people off in ways that they found delightful. So Jathan Sadowski talks a lot about Luddites and has a whole thing about how he identifies as one in some ways, which I think is great. But yeah, I think, sometimes the future, the most hopeful future that we can hope for is dismantling, is not just sort of like the train on the tracks forever. It's saying pulling the emergency brake and taking the train apart. There's been calls to defund the police, break the system. If a system doesn't work anymore, it should part and not just sort of like, MacGyvered into something that only works for 3 people. That also is a kind of innovation. That is a kind of imagination. The imagination to say, no, this isn't working, let's try again. So if we recognize that we can all enter into this imagination battle and that this battle in fact can be won, we also want to think a little bit about how to train for it. So what are the tools here? What are the strategies? So I have a couple of strategies that I use in my work. These are certainly not comprehensive. They are sort of the ways in which I think about things. And I'm sure you will find your own to use. But the 3 that I want to kind of walk through in terms of the way that I think about approaching the future are these ones. So we have history, impact, and surprise. And I usually take these in order. So first, history. So the quote here on the right is Anthony Lewandowski, a sort of former Uber engineer of lawsuit infamy, who said this. He said, quote, "The only thing that matters is the future. I don't even know why we study history. It is entertaining, I guess. The dinosaurs and the Neanderthals and all the industrial revolution and stuff like that." I know that a lot of you are probably either historians or interested in history and are like recoiling at this quote for good reason. But so much of Silicon Valley takes this stance, right? Takes this idea that like the future, springs fully formed from Elon Musk's forehead. And of course, that is not the case. Not understanding where we've come from means that you don't build good solutions, or you don't know how to take things apart. Not knowing where the roots of white supremacy come from mean that you can't really do that much about it if you don't know where it comes from. Same thing for policing. Same thing for racial bias and facial recognition. If you don't know why this has happened and where it's come from, How are you supposed to design a way out of it or figure out if we should just go back and maybe scrap it? History is really key to understanding the future. Depending on who I'm talking to, I have to like hit this point harder, but I actually sort of feel like this audience is like, yes, I got it. Like move along. When I talk to scientists, sometimes I have to go through a lot of examples about how history does in fact impact what we're doing here. I feel like y'all are probably on that page already. The second thing that I think about is impact. And that means thinking about who are the people who are most impacted by the future that we're talking about. So obviously, you know, every future impacts everyone, right? That's sort of the nature of the weirdness of time and all of that galaxy brain stuff. But when we're talking about a very specific piece of either policy or technology, thinking about who is the most impacted, who's the most directly touched by that thing is an important place to start. And so, for example, for Flash Forward, if we talk about something like CRISPR, you know, the episode is going to interview a bunch of folks who are disabled about how they feel about CRISPR. If the episode is about incarceration, you know, talking to formerly incarcerated folks, you know, figuring out who is the person for whom this future really changes their lives and talking to them, like going out and talking to them. You know, my background is in journalism. And so interviewing is something that really comes second nature to me and is one of the best parts of the job. When you're a journalist, you get to ask questions and like have people answer them, which is sort of the ultimate privilege that I can really kind of like email almost anyone and see if they'll talk to me. But yeah, going out and talking to those people, finding them, talking to them, and then sort of working from there. So, you know, often history, you know, directly correlates to who is impacted most, right? Those things are not extricable. Who, you know, how history has woven and come through to figure out who this future touches. And then the last one is surprise. I found these dinosaur graphics and I wanted to use them, so I just stuck them in here. So surprise, there's the Stegosaurus. And the last thing is surprise. And this is a thing that I think is really important in a lot of work about the future, because to go back to that point about inevitability, there's often this sense that the future is inevitable, that, you know, all the things you hear in the headlines are just what's going to happen, and here it is. But there's always something surprising about the future. There's always something that you don't really think of. And usually the surprise comes from talking to the folks who are most impacted, right? To say like, oh, wow, I never thought about it that way. Or I never really considered, you know, this thing. For Flash Forward, you know, for example, one thing, we got a request to talk about living forever for a really long time. And I was like, I don't really have any interest in this. Madeline Ashby, who's a futurist, makes a joke that, you know, living forever is only good if you make compound interest, which is why all the rich people are really interested in it. But it just wasn't, I just couldn't figure out what I could say about living forever that would be surprising and would make people think differently. And then I was talking to some folks, and including Melita Imarisha, who I showed you before, and we came to the idea of talking about what would happen to the current criminal legal system if you could incarcerate someone for 100 years, if you could actually sentence someone to a very extended period of time in prison. And that's a surprising question and gets you to surprising answers, right? About healthcare and about how much money is spent in some of these systems. And this is a very dystopian version of the future. But it did allow us to talk about questions around like, why are we doing this? Why do these places exist? Do we want them in the future? Are they serving us? Are they doing anything good? And, you know, the answer is pretty clearly no. And so thinking about how to surprise people, how to make people realize that, in fact, this isn't what they expected. And it's not just going to unfold in the way that, again, Elon Musk claims. So those are my three big, you know, the trifecta, I suppose, of ways I think about the future. And they really go in that order: history, impact, surprise. How did we get here? Who is that impacting? And what do they think? And usually that's something surprising. And that's sort of one of my big method, my very detailed methodology of Flash Forward, is thinking through these ideas. You know, I don't want to be too blasé, right? Imagination is not the only thing that we can do. And it would be naive to say that like simply sitting around and imagining a better future is all that is required to make it happen. You know, there are so many things that we're facing as a global community and as local communities that are really thorny and hard and tough and require a lot of energy and a lot of direct action and a lot of sort of really intense focus. But if you don't know what kind of future that you want, like if you don't know what you're trying to get to, what a better future could look like, you can't make it happen. And if you don't consider the powerful players and the people who are standing in your way, you can't defeat them in the imagination battle. And if you don't know what the possibilities are, you can't really realize them. We all make the future happen, and futurism should be for all of us, and particularly for folks who have been ignored and not listened to for a long time. And when this, because when those same people I showed you at the very beginning that the futurists that many people think of, if they're allowed to build the future, we all know that future is going to suck for everybody but them. And so if we can kind of seize the means of future production and really get involved in building a future, we can make much better ones. And that's what I have to say about that.
Thank you so much, Rose, for that great talk. I want to encourage everyone who's attending to write questions in the Q&A box below. We'll read them out loud. I'm going to start us off with a question. So it's been so great to share your work with my students, both in my classes, my Utopias class, and also my Feminist Tech and Futurities class. And something that I love about your work is how, like, as in your presentation, make the future seem so much more accessible to a broader range of folks, right? You inspire and encourage people to think about the future. And obviously your podcasts do some of this work, but I'm going to actually kind of ask you to plug your book a little bit right now. You didn't really talk about it in the talk, and I'm very excited for it. Can you speak a little bit about your forthcoming book, both that you've gone in this kind of comics essay hybrid, and also how you approach the futures in that text, but also how you're maybe using that to kind of expand accessible ideas of the future? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for giving me an opportunity to plug the book. So, the podcast has been around for a while and people kept asking, like, are you going to do a book? And a lot of podcasts have turned into books. And for better or for worse, like, I am not the kind of person who likes to do things where it's like easy, just like turn it into a book. So I was like, what's the thing? How can we do it? And it has, the show has these introductory scenes that are fictional. And finally, actually, one of my collaborators on the book, Sophie Goldstein, who's an amazing comics artist, actually sent me an email and was like, I love the show. Would you ever be interested in a comics anthology? And I was like, aha, haha, that is it. It's really fun to work with these comic artists. And most of them, we went after artists who we just thought were really cool, and who were really smart and like do really great work. Not all of them have experience thinking about the future or doing science or technology. And so the way the book was put together is that we went after artists that we just admired a lot. And then we sort of let them comb through the archives of Flash Forward, think about what they would want to do, and then worked with them to come up with a future kind of like storyline for their comic. And then my essay sort of follows that. And that was incredible because it is people who would never consider themselves futurists, right? Don't think about this all the time. And they came up with stuff that I would never have thought of, right? Like some of the stuff they pitched, I was like, oh, that is such a good idea that I would never have come up with, right? And so even just in the process of bringing folks in, bringing people in who like don't think of their work as futurist and sort of letting them have like in the sandbox, like having them play around in the sandbox with these ideas and with this, these tools to be able to say like, yeah, what if this, and how would we get there? And, balancing that, the very real darkness of what's happening and what can happen with also sort of the questions of like, okay, but how could we avoid that? Like, what are ways in which we can all come together and think about not doing some of those things. And even, there's a function to presenting the dark side as well, to be like, hey, you don't want this, right? So like, let's all talk about why we don't want that. And so the book was really fun to make in that sense. And similarly, I really wanted it to be a book that, anybody could pick up because they like comics, right? And it isn't just about like heavy science tech sort of like, even policy questions. And so the narratives are really personal. They're really interesting. You're following these characters, and the comics aren't like trying to explain anything to you, right? They're kind of trying to get you to imagine what you would do if you were in the situation in the future, which I find is the sweet spot for me, at least for future thinking, is like I don't really care what Elon Musk thinks he's going to do in the future. I care what like my neighbor Huang is going to do in 30 years or whatever it is. And so, yeah, I feel like inviting even collaborators in who wouldn't self-identify as science people or tech people is another way that I think a lot about trying to keep this stuff accessible, because they are going to ask questions that like I wouldn't think of, right? About all of this stuff.
Amazing, thank you. So an anonymous question asker writes, do you share the alternative futurist names again? They want it in writing, so I'll also type the answer too, but just
Yes.
so people can explore their work later on. And
Yes,
we also
absolutely.
have someone doing captions too, so you can also access the transcript too for people
Yes.
who haven't used that feature.
Yes. Okay. Let's see if I can do it off the top of my head. So Aisha Nandoro is in Jackson, Mississippi, doing a basic income project. Keolu Fox is part of the Indigenous Futures Lab. Tuck Woodstock does the Gender Reveal podcast. Charlie Jane Anders has an incredible talk about futures and futurism, and also is an incredible science fiction writer. Like, her books are so fun and so good. Walida Imarisha is a prison abolitionist who works on imagining the future of prisons and, without prisons. Adrienne Marie Brown is another person who I mentioned, who I quoted from as well. I think I'm missing one person.
I think Alice Wong and Ruha Benjamin.
Yes, Alice Wong and Ruha Benjamin. Yes, exactly. So Alice Wong does disability visibility, and Ruha Benjamin is an incredible professor at, I believe, Princeton, unless she's moved recently, and wrote a book called Race After Technology and does incredible work.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Mira, would you like to ask the next one?
Yeah, thanks for your amazing talk, Rose. I really, really enjoyed it. Jasmine is asking, when visions of the future clash, what tips do you have for creating conditions to debate, discuss, and participate?
Ooh, that's such a good question. Okay, yes. And like inherently they always will, right? Visions of the future are, like Adrienne Marie Brown said, like they're always moving in and out of alignment. I think that there are a couple of different scenarios in which this might happen, some of which are more antagonistic and more challenging than others. I want to talk a little bit about a space in which you're not debating, people's fundamental human rights, right? Like that is not up for debate. That is not a future that like is, in some ways worth debating. But if you are sort of in good faith, just imagining different scenarios, I think that that's where that sort of like the sort of Venn diagram helps. We're walking through the history of these ideas, and then thinking through like, what is my future? Who's the most impacted by my future and how? Who's the most impacted by your future and how? And thinking through, what that means and if that's good or bad or how to kind of impact that. And then the surprise thing also is like, what are the unintended consequences in a lot of ways? And obviously you're never going to predict all of them, right? None of us, I mean, if we could, we'd all be much richer than we are probably. But, thinking through like, okay, well, if that happens, then who loses access, right? Who is going to end up left out? Who are the people who, this impacts? And my general rule of thumb is that for any future, if you can't make it good for the most marginalized group, then we need to rethink, right? Like how do we make sure that we're not just creating a future that like upper middle class white people are comfortable in? And so that's where that impact slice of it, I think, is really instructive to kind of literally list out like who are the most impacted people and have that conversation, and how will they be impacted? And I think when you can kind of make these conversations real in the sense that they're not academic theoretical discussions of like people who you don't know, but actually kind of being like, who are the specific people who would be impacted? It becomes a lot more concrete, and it becomes a lot more, the stakes feel higher, right? And it's a little easier to kind of try and or maybe see where a future does or doesn't work, because you're not talking about theoretical futures anymore. You're talking about very specific groups of people who will have very specific impacts. And so I think that when you have tensions around the future, really trying to get as specific as possible about the individual people who will be impacted can help cut through some of that stuff. But it's hard. It's really hard, right? Because like, you're making stuff up, right? Like essentially you're making stuff up. And so, you know, you want to kind of do try and at least be making stuff up on the same vectors so that you can compare and contrast.
Thank you. Javiera's question is related. So Javiera wants you to speak more about the surprise dimensions. And Javiera writes, is there a criteria, lens, or something that helps identify good provocations? I think you spoke to this a bit, but maybe
that's a good question. Yeah, right. Because like surprising to whom, right? Like some people are very surprised by certain impacts, and other people are like, yes, that is my life. I could have told you that, right? Like I don't need like some futurist to tell me that. So yes, it's that's the squishiest of the three, right? To be like, what are we surprising and how? But I think it's also, you know, it's the sweet spot in some ways because it brings people in. It brings people into who are like, oh, wow, I didn't think of that. There are lots of ways to create surprise. There's an amazing artist who does a project called Object Solutions, and it's all these like parodies of technology products. And he used to be a product designer, and they're so spot on because they do genuinely look like things that you like. They're designed to be like things that you would buy. And I like to show that as surprise because it lures you in and then kind of like pulls the rug out from underneath you, right? Like how can you subvert that one thing and suddenly flip the switch for people? And a lot of that, I think, surprise comes from conversations of like, what do you think is going to happen? And then kind of seeing, because I find that I am often very surprised by what people think about the future, even if I know them pretty well, right? Because like we all have our like weird ideas and like we've all sort of percolated this information through our sort of strange sieves of our brains. And even people who I know quite well will say things and I'm like, really? You think that? And then you get to like have this fun conversation with them. So, I mean, I am a journalist, and so I am the annoying person who's like constantly asking people questions at parties and stuff to be like, to try and figure it out. But I do feel like surprise comes from conversation often, and that kind of lateral thinking move that you can kind of be like, well, what about this? And what about that? And just for strategies to getting to those places, there is, you know, and forgive me for borrowing from improv comedy, which I would never subject any of you to. But like there is a concept of yes and. And so when you are in spaces, again, if you're in spaces where everyone is there in good faith and like there to participate, and we don't have people who are souring the water or anything, really trying to yes and these future conversations can lead to really interesting surprises. I did a workshop a while back at UC San Diego, and it was about sort of like international policy and all this stuff. And I had given them this prompt, and this one team who I love, like really took it and they just like ran with it. And like by the end I came back and they were like, all right, in the future, everybody gets a goose and they have to like take care of the goose. And they had just like gone, and it was great. It was so fun because it was a great analogy for like community and care and like, how do you share resources and stuff? So like letting people get weird and creating a space where it feels like you're not going to get laughed at if you pitch everyone gets a goose, right? Like that's fine, is also, I think, a really key part of some of these conversations.
Amazing. Laura says, thank you for such an incredible talk. And how can the internet work in favor of or to the detriment of imagining new futures?
Ooh, man, the internet is like the best and worst thing, right? Like it has everything, and then also like it's a nightmare. I think that there are some really amazing resources, obviously, that you can use by connecting to the internet. You know, the internet also is like such a big thing. Like, are we talking about like social media? Are we talking about like Google or search engines or whatever it is? But I do think that like being able to imagine a future while unplugged is a really good exercise to do. You know, in part because if we think about social media, it can be really hard to create from a not defensive space if you're thinking about releasing something on the internet. The internet is great, but in many ways, the internet has sort of removed this idea of knowing your audience, because literally anybody can access the thing that you've made without any context of who you are and where it came from. And that is terrifying in many ways, right? Because like you constantly are creating from a space where you have to pre-imagine what the like least generous, most sort of like bad faith actor might interpret that you're trying to say. And, you know, try and prevent that. And that's not like it's not a constructive place to be in when you're like trying to imagine and open your mind and like think outside the box and all that stuff. If you're already imagining like what the guy on Twitter is going to say, you know, having not read anything else you've written and like not know you at all. And so in some ways, I think that like being able to do an exercise where you unplug everything and really think about like, what would I want? I do something with a little game with listeners of Flash Forward sometimes where I send them like writing prompts for them to like think about the future. And one of them is like, okay, without looking anything up, let's say that all of a sudden your world is constrained to just the block that you live on. Like that's all you have. Everything else, like there's a lava. I don't know. There's something else. Like, would you be able to survive? Like, do you know who your neighbors are? Do you know where you'd get your food? Like, is that possible? Maybe you live in a city and it's not. Like, and sort of doing those sort of like fun thought experiments without having to look anything up. Like you don't need to be able to like Google stuff. Well, in theory, you don't, to know like what's on your block. Those kinds of constructive or like weird thought experiments can be really useful. And yet, like, I mean, I am talking to you because of the internet. Like I use the internet every waking hour, basically, of like trying to look things up and, you know, figure out how things work and read papers and whatever. So it's a double-edged sword in many ways, but I do think that like imagining just for imagination's sake and not for sharing on Twitter or whatever it is a really useful exercise to be able to do, even just like for mental health purposes, is being able to like sit through and talk through it. And you don't have to share everything with the random people on Twitter.
Thank you. An anonymous attendee writes, do you have predictions for 2035?
Whoa, prediction 2035. What year is it now? 2021? Man, I don't know. Do I have predictions for 2025? It's funny, or 2035, is that what, 2035? 2035. Okay, I will say football will be no longer American football. We will not play that anymore because we realize that paying people not enough money to smash their brains in is actually not ethical. It's funny, futurists are often very terrified of making like incorrect predictions because there's like a whole sort of like industry of laughing at futurists for getting things wrong in the past. I think we should all be making much weirder predictions all the time because like no one's gonna be right. Like no one gets anything right. It doesn't matter. Like get weird. So yeah, I think that pandemics are here, right? Like zoonotic pandemics are here and we need to like learn how to manage them. There's relatively good evidence that that's not going to go away. So hopefully next time we do a better job. And by we, I mean the United States, because other places have done just fine. What else? What else some weird ones that I can say. Oh, who cares about gender anymore? Let's just not have, like, can it be opt-in instead of I just want to be able to like only like I would like to just opt out of it, please. So I feel like that's 2035. We have time to make that happen. That's the thing we could do. It's like not on your driver's license anymore. It's like not enough. Like who needs it? That's a good one. I like that one. I don't know. Who knows? No one knows what's gonna happen.
Awesome. Thank you. Mira, did you have a question?
Another question actually just popped up from Pierre. They're asking, what do you think is a bigger challenge? The inertia of the past present preventing us working on a better future, or the lack of or narrow imagination about what futures we should be even pursuing?
Ooh, can I be annoying and say the economic like pressures that people don't have time to be imagining futures, right? Like, and I guess that is inertia, but it's inertia that is imposed upon us because of capitalism, right? And because like people don't have time to be sitting around like imagining better futures in a lot of cases because they work 5 jobs or they have to take care of kids, right? There's an immense privilege right now in the ability to do this work. And I don't want to like beat around that bush. Like that is very, very real. And I think that, you know, Ursula K. Le Guin said something like, you know, capitalism seems like it is just sort of like the natural order, but so did the divine right of kings. And yet there is an imagination that has to happen, but also if your time and energy is spent trying to figure out, like trying to imagine even what like tomorrow is going to look like and where you're going to sleep and what you're going to eat, like of course you're not spending time like imagining, new social structures, because that's an unrealistic expectation. Although many people are, like, I want to say, like, many of those people are also doing that, which is incredible. And often are working towards that. But I would say that the biggest challenge is like the absolute crushing power differential and income disparity, and the ways in which extractive capitalism is just destroying our earth and our souls is probably the biggest barrier, right? It's hard. It's really hard to like, not give up and be like, all right, fine, take my blood, Peter Thiel. Like, I don't, like, at this point, it's over. I think that's a big challenge. So I annoyingly am answering C, a different answer than the two options that you gave, but hopefully that's helpful.
An anonymous attendee writes, do you think there is any danger in the idea of future predictions? In that they mean, do you find people sometimes become set on the idea of better futures and are let down with that prediction, or work doesn't follow through?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there's always a danger in this, right? Like, there are dangers in lots of different vectors, right? There's the danger in being naively optimistic, this idea that like, oh, well, the future will of course be better because things have trended better for certain people over time, right? There's a danger in that. There's a danger in believing that if we just imagine it, it will happen, which is not true, right? Like, there's work that has to be done. The imagination is the first part, and then the next part is like getting involved and finding who is doing that in your community and sort of all that stuff. There is a danger in false promises, right? Like promising people that don't worry, this is going to happen. And if you cry wolf enough times and it doesn't happen, people get sort of, disillusioned. I think also there is a danger in making it sound easy, right? That like doing this will be easy, and it's not, right? There are very, very powerful people working very hard to make sure that we all don't get some of the futures that we might imagine to be better. So yeah, I mean, like I said, it's like playing with fire in a lot of ways. Like, you have to really know what you're doing and be strategic about it. And, and I say that not to be like, I don't want to gatekeep like who gets to imagine that, like, don't imagine the future. It's dangerous, but sort of like recognizing that this is a really powerful thing, and using that power to our advantage, as opposed to kind of like letting the powerful people just have access to it and let them be the only ones who have access to it. So yeah, thinking about, going beyond just imagining is really important, right? Because if you just imagine and talk, but don't do anything, then like, yeah, of course, like it's not going to happen. It's not The Secret. It's not magic, right? Like, you have to also like, do stuff, but it is the important first step, because otherwise you end up with folks who either don't know where to go, don't know what they care about, don't know which issues they want to get involved in. You want to plug into the people who are building the futures that you also like, but you have to understand what those futures are before you can find them.
I have another question, but Mira, did you have one, or?
Sure, I'll just ask if anyone is just being introduced to your content or your podcast, where would you recommend starting? Is there a specific podcast that you would recommend, like a podcast episode that you would recommend people listening to?
Ooh, that's a good question. I did make there is a Spotify playlist that is kind of like, here's like a good smattering of what the show is like. And then probably within that, like, pick one that's about something that you're interested in. Cause yeah, like the show does range from totally absurd, like space pirates drag a second moon to Earth, and the Earth suddenly has 2 moons, all the way to like, we give land back, right? And like, what would that look like if we like returned land to indigenous people, which are like pretty different episodes. And so, my hope is that even if you came for space pirates, you stay for land back, and vice versa. But like, there's a lot of different options. So there's a Spotify playlist that you can look at that has kind of like the sort of like ones I think are the best entry level, like, here, you don't need to know anything to know. But my hope is that you can dive in anywhere, and it doesn't, there's no inside jokes. It's not the kind of podcast where it's like, if you don't start from the beginning, you're like, what is happening? Like, who are these people? What are these jokes? That is not the case. There's no prerequisite knowledge for the show. My favorite episode potentially is I like one we did a while back about getting pregnant in space, and how we actually don't know if it's possible, which seems like a wrinkle to some of the plans that are out there in terms of living in space that no one has seemed to think about for some reason. So yeah, that's a fun one.
Amazing. I also, for your writing, I really like assigning the piece about who would be the best astronauts and the discussions around disability. I find that's like such a great piece that really gets people excited.
Oh, good. I'm glad. Dude, the European Space Agency just put out a call for disabled folks to potentially go to space, and apparently like circulated that article in their like internal newsroom. And I was like, haha, I've made a difference. It's like
so cool.
journalist's dream.
That's amazing. Another attendee writes, what are your thoughts on the contestation of clashing value systems going forward that shape world building? And then they give examples like the difference between valuing essential workers during a pandemic, but not giving labor rights and protections to these same workers.
Yeah. It's funny. We talk about like the future, right? But like the future does not exist, right? Like there's a million leverage points in which, you know, you can talk about, right? Like, you know, there are all these commercials on TV for like, thank you, essential workers, but like those people aren't voting to raise the minimum wage. And it's like, what are we doing here? And I think that, you know, so much of this is recognizing who is fighting for what and where some of those campaigns come from. And, you know, I mentioned this in the talk, but like the people who have power really want to make it seem like we are all fighting each other, right? As opposed to fighting the people who have the power. In the same way that like teachers and parents have been totally pitted against each other throughout a lot of this pandemic in ways that like is not helpful, and is like really actively damaging to everyone involved. When like really the people we should be mad at are the people who like didn't handle could be handling the pandemic better. And I think a lot of it just comes out to like naming what's happening, you know, talking about who these workers are, talking about, you know, and lifting up the folks who are doing the work, like, you know, the folks unionizing in the Amazon warehouse in Alabama, right? I believe, or is it Georgia? I think it's Alabama. But like naming those names and listening and like looking to those people and sort of, I mean, frankly, just like naming those disconnects, I think can be really instructive. And sort of saying like, well, why are these people valuable to you in this context and not in that context? Like what is, you know, all of a sudden we've changed it. And even like, you know, you mentioned, Alex, that piece about disabled astronauts and potentially sending disabled folks to space. And I've had some really interesting conversations with disabled folks about that article, some of whom have sort of pushed back saying like, well, why are we only valuable to you if we can like participate in this very specific sort of like space war, right? Like kind of thing, which is a totally valid point, right? Where it's like, you know, why are we suddenly like, oh, finally a use for disabled people? Like it's kind of like often the, you know, I hope that wasn't the way the article was written, but like can kind of be the vibe sometimes where it's like, we have finally found a way for you to participate in capitalism, when they're like, no, like maybe the system doesn't work. So I think, you know, I'm giving you kind of a wishy-washy answer, but I do actually think that like naming those disconnects and highlighting them, it illustrates, it sort of shines a light on that sort of like interstitial tissue of the future, right? Which is like, where are the systems in friction, and is there a future in which those things are actually not rubbing against each other? And what does that future look like? And those are really good places to dig into when you think about the future, because if you can solve that disconnect, then you've probably solved a lot of other problems too, because you've identified a really important source of friction. So yeah, I don't know if that helped, if that's a good answer or not. It's a great question.
Thank you so much. As we're like wrapping up with the kind of last couple minutes, we went through all the audience questions. Thank you so much to our audience for all of your great questions. Rose, I was wondering if you could maybe like give us a hint of what we can look forward to in this future season.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Yes. So the first episode that comes out next week, on Tuesday of next week, is, well, I'll just tell you what it's about because I'm very excited about it. It is about a future in which we can make ourselves immune to like every poison and toxin in the world. So like snakes can no longer kill us, but also you can just like eat whatever you want, and like do drugs and alcohol still work because they're kind of poisons. And it sort of like ranges from the very specific science details of like, how does snake bite kill and why does it kill so many more people in certain places, which is like a question of access and income, and infrastructure, all the way to like, Indigenous folks who eat cycads and why that like native knowledge is really important. And then to like the history of AA. So it kind of like does all of the weird things that Flash Forward tends to do with like a small idea. So that's a fun one.
Awesome, cool. Well, I'm looking forward to Tuesday. I want to thank you so much for answering all these questions, and thank you for your great presentation. Thank you to our captioner, Sarah. Thanks to Mira for running the tech. And thank you everyone for coming. Remember, next week is our last event of the semester, but you can also watch videos of past events on our website. So thank you so much. Thank you again, Rose. Good night,
Thank you.
everybody.